For next year, are you optimistic about the global economy or pessimistic?
Pessimist.
Getting the idea that you can just print money to solve all problems, and eventually I know that will fail.
The question isn't, are we going to have a recession? The question is it going to be a depression? It will be worse than what is known as the Great Depression, the one that we experienced during the 1930s.
What's up, YouTube? Back for another episode, this time up in the mountains in Colorado, where I got COVID. And you might be wondering, what the heck am I doing videotaping myself during a COVID bout? But it's part of what FOFT is, right? You got to take what life gives you, and it's your response towards what happens that really makes who you are. And so, yeah, having COVID in a town where you can't like go skiing and snowboarding sucks, but does give me a chance to talk to you about this very important message I want to share with all the people watching, especially those who have subscribed to my channel. You know, what's heading our way is literally a once in a century plus type of event. The last time we really saw something like this was, in fact, the Great Depression in 1928-29. And that was a very, very trying time for pretty much most of the countries around the world, but particularly in the United States. And, you know, you saw the old pictures of people lining up in soup kitchens, you know, losing their houses and sleeping on the streets. Who could imagine that back then? So basically what's going on is because nobody really lives longer than 100 years, we tend to forget what mistakes and tragedies we did before and repeat them in future generations. And this is kind of like what I call the generational memory lapse, if you will. For example, nobody alive today actually lived through the Great Depression because that happened in 1928, and nobody from that era is alive in today's world. Well, we can study and read about the Great Depression. We have no idea what it actually feels like to have lived through it. And those two are two completely different things. And since all we have now is just textbooks and writings to recall the past, the propensity to repeat the same mistake, to over borrow, to over invest, to gamble with your money, to take a lot huge loans, to go with low interest rates and yada, 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 is repeated. And this continues cyclically over multiple generations. This is something actually that I didn't come up with. There are other theorists who have come up with such concepts, including the fourth turning, which has been politicized by both parties. People who are actually alive during the Great Depression, they actually felt the pain of what it was like to lose everything that they had, to get kicked out of their house and live in the streets, to go on soup kitchen lines and be hungry for them and their family and not be able to provide. And those people guaranteed won't be taking same loans and rather save their money up for a rainy day. But those people are not around anymore. So you have theories such as the fourth turning, which can be controversial and something that's been debated quite a bit, even in the political space. Or you could have economic professors and scholars such as Kondratiev, who've come up with their own business cycles that kind of match and span the similar time lengths of these generational cycles that occur. And we're about to head into one of these once in a century type of cycle changes, and it's a huge one. My understanding of all this stuff comes from my background. I studied economics, that's my undergraduate degree, along with environmental science. And then I went and worked for a bunch of investment companies basically for decades. I was doing technology stuff for them, building computer systems, trading algorithms, risk management systems, worked for some of the top, hedge funds out there, including Bridgewater with Ray Dalio rather. And so I had this understanding, this background understanding of economic, macroeconomic cycles. And back in '07 and '08, when we had that last great recession, I remember preparing for that because at that time house pricing was just off the charts, and there was the ninja loans and people just using houses as a way to gamble in the casino and make money. Everything's always about making the quick buck. And so when that kind of reached a kind of a peak in '07, I remember, you know, making some preparations of what was to come. Number one was to not buy a house at that time, which I didn't thankfully, but also making other preparations in case of some kind of a liquidity situation that did arise eventually about a year later. The normal and cyclical cleansing of excesses that this process creates has been stunted for the past few decades, ever since basically Alan Greenspan. And whenever there was a downturn or a sign of a recession, they would just like print more money or basically lower interest rates to have easy money policy so that we wouldn't have such a deep recession. And that's been going on for about 30, 40 years now. The problem with that is because these excesses are never cleaned out, it's like eating a lot of food and never going to the bathroom to take a dump. It's just like stuffing yourself and never going to, to the toilet, or you go for a little bit and you just accumulate all of this stuff over time. And that's the current situation we're in right now. And this has been going on, like I said, for not just 1 or 2 or 3 years, but multiple decades. And so to clean out all this, what should have been done in 2007 and 2008 was to let all of these bad players fail. And so that the system would get rid of them for taking bad bets. But instead of doing that, we bailed everybody out with the too big to fail TBTF situation with the big banks, then quantitative easing and free money. And all this culminated to what we had most recently with COVID, where they basically just literally put money in people's bank accounts with the government payouts. And so once you get to that point where you're putting money directly into people's pockets from government payouts, that's game over, right? That's literally like printing money into people's pockets. And we've hit that stage. So there's really not much further we can go. We've kind of hit the limits, and it's just more of the same. And we've seen this in other countries. In fact, Japan's been doing this for many, many years. And if you look at what's happening in Japan right now, they're in a tough situation with their currency. We've done this so long now that we've actually hit the point of no return. What that point of no return is when the interest payment on the debt that you borrowed to pay for all the expenditures in your economy actually starts to creep up. It actually becomes the equivalent or even more than the money you earn. It's like if you owned a house and you're paying a mortgage, your salary money, the money you make from your job, is wholesale used to just pay for the interest portion on the debt of your mortgage that you borrowed. How is that going to work out? In fact, if it gets to even more, meaning like no matter how much money you make a year, it's still going to be less than the interest you have to pay for your debt, then you're going in a negative spiral. And we may have hit that point or about to hit that point at the national level for the United States. Once that happens, that's what I call a point of no return, meaning you've crossed the Rubicon. And unless you do something very drastic, there's no other way to pay back the debt. And if you can't pay back the debt, what happens? Well, there's only drastic measures, right? You can inflate it away, which could lead to hyperinflation. And we've seen this many times in the past. This is not the first time in our society and civilization we've seen this. We've seen this time and time again. We've seen it from long time ago, even during the Roman times. You know how they would inflate in the Roman times? What they would do is they would just put in less and less silver into their coins so that they can create more and more coins because less and less silver had to go into each one of them. And that's how they would inflate the money supply. Today, we just press a button, it's all digital, but it's the same concept. You see, nothing's really changed. It's just the technology and the skills that the humans have, created over time, the techniques. But the general principle underlying it, just like gravity, never changes. It's always the same. We can't change gravity, nor can we change the impacts and concepts of inflation. And this change that I'm talking about, it's not a change that I foresee to happen in just 1 or 2 years like a typical recession, and we reset and start our path back upwards like in 2007 and 2008 and what happened after that. Rather, this is kind of a seasonal change that we're going through and not a blip or a recession dip that we're going through. So one needs to be prepared, and your mindset needs to understand that the past era of multiple decades of what has been easy money, meaning borrow money at almost no interest rate to basically, spend and do business on, is gone, right? You can look at it from any angle. You can look at it from mortgage and real estate. You can look at it from even private equity and venture capitalists in the startup. Just recently, there was an article that came out that said this is the worst venture capital funding period in about 6 years ever. That's a long time because money has just shrunk. No LPs or limited partners want to give money to venture capitalists anymore. The era of easy money is over. That needs to sink in. And what that means is it's the tide that has gone out. And it's not like a wave that comes back right afterwards. It's gone out and it's going to stay out for some time. And you need to flip the way you think about how you do your business, manage your finances, and also protect your path forward, your career. What's happened most recently, which is the most concerning and most telling to me, that we are near the end or at the end already, is the way that we've behaved as an economy in the past few years. And what I mean is basically since leading up to COVID and since COVID, we have created such a huge amount of money to basically paper over the downturn from the global supply chain shutdown that COVID brought about, that the amount of debt incurred, it's amazing. If you look at charts, we being the United States, incurred so much debt that just in the past few years, the amount of debt we incurred is the equivalent of more than what we've incurred for many decades worth in just a few years. And where'd all that money come from? Well, they had to print it, essentially. I mean, people will talk about all this financial jargon and machinations, but just like I said earlier about the Romans with the coins and silver and all that, it's just heebie-jeebie stuff layered on top of the core, which never changes. Like gravity never changes. We will never be able to undo gravity. Similarly, you're not going to change the laws of economics. You increase the money supply, prices of things goes up. That's just the way things are. Then there's the supply side of inflation. I'm not going to turn this into a financial video, but the bottom line is, look, country printed a lot of money, and as a result, all that money, where did it go to, right? Some of it went to the pockets of people, so they were spending, right? So that's why it's confusing now. Like people are spending money because they're given money by the government to spend, and so they don't want to go to jobs, right? That's why the unemployment rate is low, because they're not going to jobs, right? There's no need, and so they don't qualify as an unemployed person anymore because of all the government handouts. The other thing is, a lot of the money went to who? The top 1%, or actually 0.1%. How? Through their stocks and equity. That's how, from the companies that they own.
We have an incredible growth in inequality, which I think is the poison in the political system.
So what does that mean? We've exacerbated and exploded the inequality between the rich and the poor. Anytime that happens, bad things occur. Bad things like the French Revolution. If you look back then, the disparity between the rich and the poor was huge. And we're there. We're there again. The rich are super, 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 super rich, and the poor are just like this tiny fraction of what the amount of income and money and wealth is. It's amazing how we've arrived at this point. So when you look at that part of the equation, which is the social strife and cultural challenges that arise from that, it's no surprise that you'll have things like, the riots that we see, different movements, including Black Lives Matter movement and the insurrection in January in Capitol Hill, and so on and so forth. These things, these social unrests, are not something that's surprising to me. It's what happens when you have huge disparity in income. And then you throw into the mix the geopolitical morass that we're in. It's not just political it's geopolitical morass that we're in. Every time something happens, you're like, no way that's going to happen. It happens. And then the bar is raised, like, no way that's going to happen. And then that thing happens. And this all started, I remember back before Trump was elected, when he won the Republican National Convention, I was like, there's no way, he's going to be the winner of the Republican National Convention. And he won. And when he won, that's when the light bulbs went off in my head. And I said, look, this guy is going to become the president of the United States, and that's going to cause a lot of problems for the country politically. And some polarization is going to result out of him being the president, knowing how he is. And so that's actually one of the reasons why I did leave the United States at that point in time, before he was elected president. And then I went to Singapore, and lo and behold, while I was in Singapore, he was elected president, and everybody, all the American friends I had in Singapore were just bombshelled, like, they thought Hillary was going to win, and it was just, and so that happened, right? And then the thing after that was like Brexit, like, oh no, there's no way Brexit happened, right? And then after that is, you just stack this on, like, oh, there's no way Russia's going to invade Ukraine, and then Ukraine happens. Well, there's no way, Israel is going to just go over and mow down, the Gaza Strip, and guess what? That just happened. And so, what is the next thing? Oh yeah, throw in COVID there, right? But that's kind of like a white swan, if you want to call it. We've been always saying that every 10 or 20 years there is a very big pandemic. There's SARS, MERS, and the list goes on and on. But the COVID one is special, and I don't want to get this video into the COVID whole thing because that's that's a whole other thing altogether. But my point is, every time we think that there's something that's no way that's going to happen, it happens, and the bar keeps getting raised, and we forget that the thing just happened just a year or 2 years ago. And so what's happening is this acceleration of unbelievable things, unspeakable things that have become reality, and then we just get accustomed to it. And the pace of this is accelerating. And so, if you look back at just the past few years and you try to then project forward this exponential acceleration of unspeakable things that happen, you can see where we're heading, right? And in a short 5 years from now, there's going to be a bunch of things that we just absolutely never thought would ever happen, blow our minds type of thing will happen. Guarantee you it will happen. And then there will be things mixed into that is just like the COVID thing, which is like a white swan, like, oh yeah, this solar flare, like, all power outage could never happen. But we're aware of it, but it'll never happen type of a thing, and then it happens, right? Mix in a couple of those, and that's what I mean by that greater depression that is heading our way. There is a mix of these economic and financial conditions that is ongoing and nearing an end of a long cycle with the geopolitical tensions. And mind you, you've got two guys. You have a guy over in Russia and a guy over in China who have this very ideological accomplishments they want to achieve in their life and to be known for as their legacy. And I think they're both the same age, about 70. And they know that they have this limited time in their life, right? Because they look at Biden, right? Cognitive decline is a thing. They don't want to be, trying to conquer the world and achieve their ideological, accomplishment when they don't know where to walk off on stage. It's not going to happen. So they know that this window of time is there for them, and they both know they want to achieve something for their nations. And so it is no surprise that they're going to continue to work together towards that goal, given that they're pretty much not going to be elected out of their position unless something drastic happens, like a takeover, a coup d'etat, or some kind of a revolution. So in 2024, we're going to see a continuation of this cycle play out. And the part that we're going to probably see this year is the financial cycle really hitting its peak in terms of a change. And with that comes the recession that everybody has been waiting for, but it hasn't happened yet, and some has written off finally happening. And the reason why it's taken this long for the recession to hit is there's usually a lag time between when the Federal Reserve jacks up their interest rates and the effects of those interest rates actually play out in the economy. And in this particular cycle, that extension has been elongated because of the handouts that government has been given to people's bank accounts directly in payouts because of COVID. And so there's this extension of the impact of what's happened from the jacking up of the interest rates to the slowing of the economy. But that is going to be happening this year in 2024. And so what that means is all of a sudden, people are going to come to the realization that yes, there is going to be a recession. And in fact, it's going to be a pretty bad recession. And everything that has been flipped upwards towards a very positive thinking, which includes the current stock market and business conditions, is going to turn really quickly. And these things flip on a dime, do a 180 down to, oh my God, the world is ending, we're in a recession. And that's going to cause a lot of job losses and a lot of people getting stressed out and a lot of angst among all the consumers who are basically tapped out and relying on credit and credit cards, particularly in the United States. A lot of you might be asking me, well, the stock market is at near all-time highs and the unemployment rate is low and looks like we're not even going to have a recession. And all I can tell you is, you know what? Things always look really great right before the rug is pulled right from under you. This was the case back then. In fact, this has always been the case. It was the case back in 07 and 08. It was a case back in the dot-com bubble. Back then, the dot-com bubble, it wasn't AI. It was just, the internet and .com. And, some crazy things happened back then as well, like pets.com. Most of you may not know that, what that was about because you're too young. But it was similar to the AI craze we have today. It's always like this before the rug gets pulled out from under you. Trust me on this. And I will tell you one thing, and again, I don't want to turn this into a financial and economic type of blog, but just know one thing. Never, ever, ever in the history of mankind has the stock market bottomed before the recession started. That has never happened. 100%. And so what that means is either there's no recession at all, and that's why the stock market has already bottomed and now will just continue to go up forever, or the recession is still coming and then the stock market will bottom afterwards. Now, if you believe that there is no recession that's coming, yeah. So yeah, when we go into this difficult time period, nobody is safe. And I mean nobody. Look, I worked for a company, well, it's not even a company, it's like a government entity, right? To some degree, funded and sponsored by it. Nobody's going to be safe once the problem starts. It's going to unravel pretty quickly, and everyone's going to be impacted. There are going to be many people who lose their jobs, and there's going to be a lot of tightening of wallets and incomes and expenditures. The first and most important aspect of preparing is yourself, your inner self, for what's to come. And you need to have a strong core to weather all the emotions that are going to get triggered by the periphery stimulus coming in from the negative things that are going to happen. The second thing you need to do is to diversify your sources of income. If you're a salary person and have a steady job making salary every month, you need to consider that that steady job may not be in existence in a year or 2 years from now. In fact, that's something I thought would happen to me. And I work for a super stable company that's government linked, but I took matters into my own hands and didn't wait for that situation to come to me and then be forced to figure out what to do in an emergency type of situation, but rather I decided to leave and actually start preparing now so that I have a length of time, and I've been in preparation for over 2 years now, so that I can do something like FOFTI and have an alternative stream of income that I can then use to supplant myself. The third thing you need to do is to protect your assets, and that means you need to convert them into the types of assets that can withstand and hold their value even through these difficult times. So things such as physical gold, for example, or even the digital version of the same thing, which would be Bitcoin. These things are something you should consider converting some percentage of your assets into, so that it would protect you from, let's say, the worst case scenario where some kind of a crisis actually emerges because of this situation and you're forced to then actually liquidate. But if you don't have something that you can liquidate anymore because of the crisis evaporating everything, then you're going to be stuck in a world of pain. Now, for some of the more adventurous of you, there is a fourth option as well, which is to actually make money and benefit from the downturn, which is something I did back in 07, 08, and I'm also planning to do in this current one, which is a much bigger one that doesn't just reset itself in a couple of years. And so those are 4 ways, with the 3 being the fundamental and the 1 being an extra credit way to increase your assets. No, I'm not a billionaire or some influencer. I'm just a regular Joe like you. Had a career in corporate America, did a startup on the side, had some successes. But what I was able to do was learn and benefit from the 2007 and 8 Great Recession. And here we are in 2024, about to undergo an even greater change in cycle that will last longer. And I want to share what I've learned back then with you here so that you can join me and also benefit from the cyclical change and not get caught up in the wrong side of the boat when the shift happens. So thanks for watching. Hit the subscribe button if you think any of this information is helpful to you, so you can spread the word, get the YouTube algorithm to share the message with others. And I'll see you in the next episode. I'm not sure I'm going to be, it might be in California, but I'll see you then. Peace.